I'm just a grandmother who woke up one morning thinking I'd be baking bread in my kitchen, only to find out that kitchen no longer belonged to me.
You hear about betrayal on the news, on talk shows, in novels, but you never think it'll arrive in your own front yard. Especially not wearing the face of the man you slept beside for 42 years.
It started like any other Tuesday. I made coffee, fed the cat, watered the plants. Then a knock came at the door. 2 strangers, suits, clipboards. One had a camera. We're just here for the walkthrough before closing, the tall one said. I blinked. Closing. The sale. This house. I laughed. You must have the wrong address. This house isn't for sale. They exchanged a glance, then handed me a piece of paper with my husband's signature at the bottom.
My name wasn't anywhere on it.
I didn't faint. I didn't scream. I just stood there.
The world slowed. Everything tilted.
My knees went cold before my fingers did. I walked back into my kitchen, the place I had made meals for my children, for him, for birthdays and holidays. And just because days, and I realized it wasn't mine anymore. That night, he came home like nothing had happened. I showed him the paper. My voice didn't shake, but my hands did. He didn't even flinch. It was time, Mary, he said.
The market's hot. We'll get something smaller. I already talked to the agent.
Already decided, already planned, already erased me. I asked him why he hadn't told me.
You would have made it emotional, he said.
And that's when it hit me. He hadn't just sold the house, he had sold our life. Behind my back. Without my voice. Without my consent.
I wasn't his partner anymore.
I was a placeholder. And in that moment, something deep inside me cracked quietly, invisibly. But not permanently. Because what he didn't know, what he couldn't predict, is that the woman he tried to silence was about to start speaking.
They say houses are just walls and roofs. But mine, it was a living scrapbook of everything I'd ever given.
Every chipped corner on the stairway, every scratch on the kitchen table had a story. The creak in the 3rd step that was from my son James jumping down in his cowboy boots every morning before school. The faded wallpaper in the hallway chosen the year I lost my mother. Something soft to hold the grief. The back garden planted with my bare hands, one flower bed at a time, while my husband watched from the porch. Now it belonged to strangers. I stayed quiet the rest of that week. I cooked his meals, folded his shirts, answered him with nods and one-word replies. I was still there physically, but inside I had vanished. He didn't notice, not really. That's the thing about people who take you for granted. They only realize what you meant after you stop giving.
That Friday, I found the box, tucked in the garage behind old fishing gear.
Inside were documents, emails, sale agreements, price negotiations. Months of planning without a single word to me. He even made a spreadsheet of transitional costs.
That's what he called it. Transitional.
Like I was luggage being moved between airports. Like my memories could be packed up and shelved somewhere else. And the worst part? The house had already closed. I wasn't just about to lose it. I had already lost it. I sat on the porch that night, wrapped in a quilt I made 30 years ago, and listened to the house breathe. The wind whistling through the gutters, the soft hum of the fridge, the groan of the floorboards as he walked past feet that had stomped through every corner of my love. And I asked myself a question I hadn't dared to before. What if I stopped being the woman who accepts this? I wasn't sure yet what that meant, but I knew one thing. He may have sold the house without telling me, but he hadn't sold me. And I was still standing. For now. But soon I'd be rising.
I didn't cry that night. Not like you'd expect.
I just sat there still, with the quilt pulled up to my chin, listening to the silence between us grow louder and louder. He was inside watching television like nothing had happened. I was outside watching my whole life become a memory I wasn't ready to let go of. The next morning, I made him breakfast. I served it like always eggs the way he liked them, toast, slightly burnt, because he said it tasted more like something. And as he sat down chewing with that same indifference I had come to know for 40 years, I looked at him.
Really looked at him.
And for the first time in my life, I saw him not as my husband, but as the man who took everything I ever built and traded it for his own convenience.
No conversation, no apology. Just a cold business transaction with me as the collateral damage.
I found the documents I said, voice steady. He didn't flinch.
Didn't say sorry. Just sipped his coffee and replied, it had to be done.
Like he'd taken out the trash. Like my memories were a burden he finally got rid of.
I don't remember walking away. But I do remember standing in the laundry room minutes later, gripping the counter, whispering the words,
"You don't get to write the end of my story." That day, I called my friend Anita. She was the only one who still checked in even when I had become a shadow in my own life. "I need to get out," I told her. She didn't ask why. She just said, "Then let's start packing." I didn't leave right away. I had to plan. For once this time, I would be the one making decisions without telling him. I found out the final move-out date from the closing contract.
2 weeks.
He assumed I'd just follow him, move wherever he wanted, start over in whatever new box he picked. But I had a different idea.
One that started with a tiny storage unit, 2 suitcases, and a bank account he didn't know I still had.
I wasn't running away. I was finally running toward myself. The day I bought my own phone was the first time in years I felt like I had power. Not a big power, not something loud, but something sacred. Control. He could take the house. He could even take the past.
But what I did next, that was mine.
All mine. And I wasn't about to waste it. The sun rose like it always did. But that day, I didn't get up early. I didn't pad quietly down the hallway to start the coffee. I didn't toast the bread. I didn't peel the oranges he liked so much.
No, that day I just sat in bed, wrapped in my own silence.
Wrapped in the thought, let's see what happens when I disappear from his routine.
He called out once, then twice. And by the third time, I could hear the irritation bubbling in his voice.
"Where's my coffee?" I didn't answer, didn't even move. He stood in the doorway, staring at me like I had committed a crime. "You sick or something?" I looked up at him steady. "No, just tired of being your maid." There it was.
That pause.
That flicker of something in his face. Maybe surprise, maybe guilt, or maybe just confusion that I finally said it out loud.
"You're my wife," he said as if that explained everything.
"No," I replied calm and clear. "I'm your convenience." That moment right there was when it began to shift. He left for work without saying another word. But I knew he felt it. The rug pulling out from under him. I had always been the quiet one. The agreeable one. The one who'd never leave, never raise her voice, never say no. But now I was the woman who had nothing to lose. I spent the next few days doing things he'd never expect. I called a legal aid clinic. I got copies of the house sale documents. I looked up my rights. I quietly photographed everything jewelry gifts from my mother family items. I found out what couldn't be taken from me. Because if he wanted a clean break, I was going to make sure I left with my dignity intact. He started noticing the change. I stopped cooking dinner. I stopped washing his clothes. I stopped responding to his snide remarks with silence. And that terrified him more than any screaming ever could. Because silence from someone like me, that's not surrender. That's strategy. I found an old notebook and started writing things down. Memories, dreams I'd buried, even a list of things I wanted to do before I turned 70. It felt silly at first, but then it started to feel like a roadmap back to myself. And then one night, as he stormed in late from a meeting, I was sitting at the kitchen table. No dinner waiting, no slippers by the door. Just me drinking tea and reading a book. He looked lost. Like someone had removed the furniture in his mental blueprint of what life should be. And I said, without even glancing up, "You sold the house, but you can't sell me." There's a moment in every woman's life when she realizes silence has never protected her, only concealed the scars. And that morning, I picked up the phone and made an appointment with a lawyer. It wasn't some bold cinematic moment. I didn't slam down the phone or cry with triumph. I was shaking, but I did it anyway. Because I needed to know what rights does a woman have when the man she trusted with her life sells her life out from under her. The lawyer was younger than I expected, maybe my son's age. But she looked me in the eye, listened without judgment, and said 7 words I'll never forget. "You have more power than you think." That broke me. Because no one had ever said that to me before. I told her everything. The years of silence. The house, the emotional exile, the feeling of being erased inside my own life. And when she laid out the options, legal steps, financial recovery, property division, it was like someone turned the lights on in a room I didn't even know I'd been trapped inside. That night, I came home with a folder in my purse. He was watching TV, beer in hand, as if nothing had changed. And when he glanced at me, I just smiled. A quiet, measured smile.
Because now I had information.
And information is a kind of revenge. Over the next week, I gathered everything. Our joint account statements,
A copy of our marriage license.
the deed transfer documents, photos of the house before and after. I took back the things that were mine, not in anger, but in strategy. Because I didn't want to scream. I wanted to win. One night, as he got up to grab another beer, I looked at him and said gently, "Do you remember when we first bought that house? How I planted roses out front. How I painted that guest room myself, 7 months pregnant." He stared at me confused. "What are you talking about?"
I sipped my tea. I'm just reminding you of what you threw away.
He didn't understand. Not yet. But he would. Because soon he'd learn.
You can't erase someone's soul with a signature. You can't bury 40 years of sacrifice under a sale agreement. And you sure as hell can't destroy a woman who's just waking up.
In the days that followed, I met with the lawyer again.
This time with documents, proof, a story backed by paper and pain.
And she said, "We're going to fight this. And you won't be alone." And I believed her. Because for the first time in years, I believed in myself. The morning I handed him the envelope, the sun was shining like it was any other day.
But nothing about that day was normal. Inside that envelope was a copy of the legal notice my lawyer had sent. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was lethal at least to the lie he'd been living.
He opened it slowly, confusion creasing his brow.
Then his eyes narrowed, his hands trembled,
and I stood still calm, watching the cracks form in the man who once made me feel so small.
"What is this supposed to be?" He barked the paper, trembling in his hand.
I didn't flinch.
"It's a response," I said, "to what you did behind my back, to what you tried to take from me." His voice raised. "You're blowing things out of proportion." "No," I said, quiet but firm. "You just never thought I'd fight back." He tried every card in the manipulator's deck. Denial. It wasn't personal. Guilt, after all I've done for you. Dismissal. You wouldn't even understand these things. But I didn't argue.
I didn't explain.
Because I had already explained myself for decades. And this time, I was done. For the next few weeks, things turned tense. We lived like ghosts under the same roof. He sulked. He yelled. And when that didn't work, he started being nice. Pathetic hollow nice. The kind that tastes like manipulation wrapped in a smile. But I wasn't that naive girl anymore. I saw through it all. One night, he cornered me in the kitchen. "You're really going through with this." I looked him dead in the eye. "You already went through with it. I'm just finishing what you started." He didn't speak after that. He just walked away, slow, defeated.
And I realized
he was scared, not of me, but of the woman I had become. I started sleeping better. Not because the problems vanished, but because I wasn't afraid of them anymore. Each day, I walked taller. Cooked meals for myself, not because I had to, but because I chose to. Sat in the garden and remembered what joy used to feel like. And little by little, I stopped feeling like a prisoner in a home that was no longer mine. And then came the meeting, with lawyers, with truths, with legal terms he never thought I'd understand. I showed up dressed in grace and steel, and when he tried to interrupt me mid-sentence, I didn't raise my voice. I just leaned in and said, "This is my turn to speak. Don't interrupt a woman who found her voice after 40 years. The room fell silent. Even his attorney looked away. That day wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation, of voice, of dignity, of the life I buried so many times to keep the peace. And as I signed the documents, I thought to myself, this isn't an end, it's a beginning. One I had written with my own hand. Freedom doesn't always come with fireworks or celebration. Sometimes it walks in quietly on trembling legs and tear-soaked cheeks whispering, "You made it." The day I moved out, I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't sad, but because I had cried enough already.
cried in silence, cried in shame, cried into pillowcases that never told a soul. Now I felt light, not happy exactly, but weightless in a way I hadn't felt in years. I had found a small apartment, nothing fancy, a one-bedroom second-floor walk-up with a tiny balcony and creaky floorboards. But when I stepped inside with the keys in my hand, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Ownership, of space, of peace, of myself. I unpacked slowly, box by box, item by item. Memories and pain and strength all tucked between teacups and photo frames. I kept the photo of my children, even if they hadn't called, even if they hadn't asked how I was. A mother's heart doesn't stop hoping, even when it's bruised beyond recognition. At first, the nights were hardest. Silence stretched long and thin like a hallway with no end. I'd sit on the sofa with a warm drink in hand, thinking about everything I had given and everything I had lost. But then I remembered I hadn't lost myself. I had finally found her. Neighbors started noticing me. A young woman in the unit below would bring over muffins. An elderly man across the hall offered to fix my faucet. Even the postman started chatting more than usual. It was like people saw me again, not as a wife, not as a maid, not as a shadow in someone else's life, but as me. One evening, I stood on the little balcony watching the sun melt behind the buildings. It painted everything gold. I whispered to the sky, "God, I don't know what comes next, but thank you for getting me this far." And I felt something stir deep inside, like the first heartbeat of a new life. I began doing things I hadn't done in years. I took walks without asking permission. I signed up for a writing class at the library. I even bought myself a red scarf, bright and bold, like the version of me I was still learning to love. And slowly, I started laughing again. Not just little polite chuckles, real belly-shaking laughter. The kind that surprises you. The kind that makes you feel human again. One day as I passed by the mirror, I stopped. Not to fix my hair, not to check for wrinkles, but to really look, and what I saw was a woman who had survived. A woman who was no longer defined by the lies, the silence, or the man who sold her home like she was nothing. No, I was something. I was everything he underestimated. And now I was free. There comes a point in every woman's life, especially a woman like me, when silence begins to feel like a prison just as much as any abusive home ever did. I had escaped the house. I had found peace. But there was one piece left behind, still chained to the pain. His name was Michael. Michael was our oldest, the one who used to wait by the window when I came home from work. The one who once made me a lopsided Mother's Day card with a macaroni heart. But as he got older, he grew more like his father than I dared admit. Distant, cold, transactional. When I told him I was leaving his dad, he barely looked up from his phone. "That's your business, Mom," he said flatly. My business. The man who hit me, the man who sold our house, the man who controlled my every breath, that was just my business. I walked away from that conversation shattered, but not surprised. Weeks passed, then months. Not a single call. No text. No, "How are you, Mom?" I had raised him. I had loved him with my every heartbeat. And now, I was nothing more than a footnote in his schedule. So I sat down one day in my little apartment with the smell of fresh tea and the sound of rain tapping the window, and I wrote him a letter. Not to blame, not to guilt, but to free myself. It began like this. "Dear Michael, I'm writing to you not because I expect anything, but because mothers never truly give up on their children." I told him about what his father had done. I told him how it felt to be sold out of my own home. But more importantly, I told him what I had found since I left. I found quiet that doesn't hurt. I found mornings that don't start with fear. I found out I'm stronger than I ever knew. And I hope one day you'll want to know that woman too. I sealed it with trembling hands, not out of sadness, but out of strength. Because saying those words, writing that truth, wasn't for him. It was for me. A week later, I received a reply. One sentence. "I didn't know it was that bad. I'm sorry, Mom." It wasn't much, but it cracked something open. Maybe it would lead to something.
Maybe not.
But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had spoken from the deepest part of my truth.
And nothing, no silence, no betrayal could take that away.
You see, there's power in telling your story, even when no one's listening.
Because the act of saying, "This happened and I lived through it," is itself a revolution. I may have lost a son to pride, to denial, to learned cruelty. But I had gained something deeper. My voice. And once you find that, you never let it go again. It was on a Wednesday morning, rain drizzled lightly across the porch railings, that I saw her. A woman in her early 40s, maybe younger, walking briskly down the sidewalk with a boy about 8 years old trailing beside her, soaked from head to toe. They stopped in front of my small gate. She looked up, hesitated, then rang the bell. I wasn't expecting anyone. No deliveries, no appointments. When I opened the door, she looked startled, then embarrassed. "I'm so sorry to bother you, ma'am," she said, wiping her brow. "My car broke down just around the corner and my phone's dead. I saw your light on." Her eyes were tired. Not just from the rain, but the kind of tired that comes from years of carrying more than one soul is meant to carry. I let her in. We dried the boy off. I poured them hot tea. Her name was Jenna. His was Kyle. And within 30 minutes, she had unraveled the kind of story I didn't think I'd hear again. She was running from a man who had broken her. Physically, emotionally, legally. "I stayed," she whispered, as she held the tea mug with both hands, "because I thought my son needed his father. But then I realized he needs his mother more. Alive." Her words echoed in me like thunder. It was as if she had cracked open a door I thought I had closed for good. The pain, the confusion, the guilt, the survival. It was all there in her face. But so was something else, hope. That night, they stayed on my couch. The next morning, I made pancakes, and we laughed about how Kyle didn't like syrup touching his eggs. Then, I gave her the name of the women's shelter that had helped me when I left George. I made the call myself. I even walked her there. As we reached the gate of the shelter, she turned and hugged me tightly. "You don't know this," she said, her voice cracking. "But last night, I prayed, and then I saw your light." I stood there blinking back tears, because I remembered how it felt to walk into that shelter alone. Afraid, ashamed, invisible. And now, here I was, the light in someone else's darkness. That's the thing they never tell you about healing. It doesn't just patch you up. It turns you into a beacon, a lighthouse for the next lost soul. I don't know where Jenna is now. We spoke a few times after. I know she found work. She sent a picture of Kyle in a Halloween costume, a pirate with a crooked hat. But even if she never calls again, I'll always carry that night with me. Because for once, I wasn't the one needing rescue. I was the one doing the saving. And in that moment, I realized maybe the universe sent her not because she needed me, but because I needed to remember how far I had come, that I was no longer the woman waiting to be loved. I was now the woman giving love without condition, and nothing, not betrayal, not abandonment, not even the man who sold my house could take that away from me. Weeks passed and a strange calm settled over my home. I tended my garden. I baked too much banana bread. I wrote in a notebook I hadn't touched in years. And one day, I stood in front of my small bathroom mirror and whispered, "You're not broken anymore." But peace wasn't enough. Not for me. Not after what I'd been through. Not after George took our house, stripped me of dignity, and left me scraping to rebuild a life he tried to erase. So I did something I never imagined I'd do. I signed up to speak at the town hall, not just as a concerned citizen, but as a grandmother, as a survivor, as someone who knew what it felt like to be robbed in silence. The meeting was crowded, mostly men in gray suits and women with tight smiles. When I stepped up to the microphone, my hands trembled, but my voice didn't. "I'm not here to shame a man," I began. "I'm here to shine light on a system that allows silence to become suffering. I lost my home not because I didn't work for it, but because I trusted someone I loved
The room shifted. I saw heads tilt, eyes blink. I was married for 38 years. I raised our children. I cooked, cleaned, worked part-time, and supported his dreams. And one day, he sold the house from under me. Gasps, quiet murmurs. One woman covered her mouth. "I'm not looking for pity," I said. "I'm looking for change." I told them about the loopholes, how one signature, one legal blind spot could destroy a life. I spoke of other women I had met in the shelter. And I said, if I had known what rights I didn't have, I would have fought sooner. So now I fight, so the next woman doesn't have to wait 38 years to speak. By the time I stepped down, I was shaking again. But it wasn't fear. It was release. It was power flowing back into my bones. Later that evening, a young woman approached me in the parking lot.
She looked maybe 30, holding a clipboard. I didn't plan to stay for the whole thing, she said, but your story, it hit me hard. I think my mom's going through something similar. I'm going to talk to her tonight. That night I cried. Not from pain, but from purpose. Because somewhere in that hall, my voice had cracked open another heart. And that, my friend, is what healing does. It turns pain into purpose, silence into speech, wounds into wisdom. George once sold my home without telling me. But what he didn't know was, I'd eventually find a voice no paper could sign away. And that voice, it's loud now. It speaks not just for me, but for every grandmother who's ever whispered enough behind closed doors. I always believed that certain things didn't need to be said. That silence could be noble. That swallowing pain meant being strong. But now, I see it differently. Because silence protected him and destroyed me. So one quiet Sunday morning, I sat down at my kitchen table, my new kitchen in my new apartment, and I wrote a letter I never thought I'd write. It began simply, "Dear George, I hope this finds you well. I'm not writing for closure. I'm writing for clarity. You sold our house without telling me. You knew it would crush me. You knew I had no safety net, and still you did it. And yet I'm not angry anymore. I'm something deeper. I'm awake." The words poured out. You treated my devotion like convenience, my sacrifice like servitude, and my trust like a signature you didn't need. I paused there staring at the ink. I didn't want revenge in this letter. I didn't need to rip him apart. I just wanted him to see. I don't hate you. That would take too much space in a heart I'm finally reclaiming. I told him about the shelter, about the old woman who taught me how to sew again, about the teenage girl who called me Nana after just 2 weeks. I told him I had found work helping other women recover from situations like mine. I told him, you took our house, but you didn't take me. And finally, I ended with, one day you'll look around your big empty house and wonder why it feels so cold. It's not because you lost me. It's because you never saw me to begin with. I didn't send the letter. I folded it, sealed it in an envelope, and placed it in the back of my closet. Because sometimes words aren't meant for the person who hurt you. They're meant for the version of yourself that still needed to say them. Later that week, I read the letter to a support group I'd joined. One woman held my hand the entire time. Another, silent the whole session, stood up after and whispered, "Me too." And that's when I realized something even more powerful than justice. Healing isn't about who apologizes. It's about who speaks. When silence is no longer safe. And for the first time in decades, I was finally, truly safe. There's a moment after deep betrayal when the world becomes strangely quiet. No more shouting matches. No more slammed doors. No more pretending. Just quiet. But in that quiet, I started to hear something I hadn't listened to in years, my own voice. One morning, I walked past a cafe near my apartment. There was a help wanted sign on the window. I stood there staring, unsure if someone like me, 68, gray-haired, and with a resume last updated in the 1980s, had any place left in the working world. But I walked in anyway. The young woman at the counter was named Elise. She had tattoos down her arm and kindness in her eyes. When I stammered through my request, she didn't laugh. She said, "You want to try mornings? I think our regulars would love you." And just like that, I was working again. Pouring coffee, remembering names, and slowly reclaiming my place in the world. One man came in every Tuesday. He'd always smile and say, "Your eyes look like my mom's." She used to tell stories while baking, So I started telling stories too. Not the tragic ones. Not at first. Little tales. About childhood. About my garden. About the first pie I ever burned, and how George never let me forget it. And they laughed. They listened. They cared. Then came the day one woman, probably in her 40s, said, "You should write these down." I chuckled. "Me, a writer?" She nodded. People need to hear from women like you. The ones who lived. The ones who lost and still chose to rise. That night, I stared at a blank notebook page. And then I wrote the title. They sold the house, but not my soul. The first chapter began with a question. What do you do when everything you've built is sold behind your back? And suddenly the pages filled themselves. Pain poured out like ink. So did wisdom. So did power. I wasn't just healing. I was documenting survival. So one day, someone else sitting on a kitchen floor staring at foreclosure papers would know. They are not alone. And in all that newness job purpose pages, I began to realize something simple yet sacred. It's never too late to begin again. Even when you thought the story was over, there's a strange freedom in rebuilding from nothing. Once the ashes settle, you're left with space, a blank canvas, and the quiet realization that you owe no one the version of yourself they once mistreated. I had grown used to surviving, but now I was finally living. The manuscript I had started at the cafe, it had grown into over 200 pages. Each chapter poured out of me like breath I'd been holding for decades. One afternoon, Elise, the barista who first gave me a shot, read a few pages during her break. She looked up with tears in her eyes and whispered, "You have no idea how many women need this." Her words clung to me, and for the first time in my life, I thought maybe my voice matters. It was around then that I got a letter from my husband. Not a phone call, not a visit. A cold, stiff envelope with my name on it like we were strangers. Inside was a typed message. I didn't mean for things to go this way. The house was in my name legally. I thought it was best for us to downsize. If I could go back, I'd handle it differently. Hope you're doing well. That was it. No apology. No mention of the years I spent scrubbing floors, raising his children, nursing his ego, and defending him even when I shouldn't have. And for a moment, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I saw it for what it truly was. A man trying to maintain control with as few words as possible. But he no longer had control over me. So I sat down at my little desk in the corner of my apartment and wrote something I never thought I'd write. "Dear George, thank you for selling the house. Without that betrayal, I never would have left. Without being left, I never would have found my strength. I'm working again. I'm writing. I'm healing. And I've never been more certain of who I am. You didn't break me. You just freed me. Marie." I folded it, put it in an envelope, but I didn't mail it. No, that letter was for me. A closing chapter. A full stop. You see, sometimes the greatest revenge isn't fire and fury. It's peace. The kind that glows quietly in the eyes of a woman who walked through hell and came out with grace. I tucked that letter inside my manuscript, and then I picked up my pen, because I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The morning I stepped onto that tiny stage at the local library, I could feel my knees trembling beneath my thrifted floral dress. I had been invited to speak just 5 minutes, they said, at a women's words night for local writers. Elise had submitted an excerpt of my manuscript without telling me. I was furious, until I wasn't. Because the moment I stood in front of that modest crowd, something inside me shifted. I looked out into the small room of folding chairs, bookstore owners, university students, young women clutching notepads. And I said, "My name is Marie. I'm a grandmother, a mother, a woman. But for decades, I was invisible in my own home. My husband sold our house without telling me. But instead of losing everything, I found myself." The room stilled. You could hear nothing but breath. Then I read a short chapter. The one about the morning after I left, about standing in the rain with nothing but my purse and a heart full of confusion. When I finished, a young woman stood and whispered, "Thank you." Then another, and another. Tears, clapping, connection. For the first time in years, I was seen. Later that night, a woman named Claudia approached me. She was in her 40s, a single mom, and she whispered,
That part about the eggs and toast, I've been making breakfast like that for a man who won't even look me in the eye.
We cried together. Two strangers, two survivors.
And it hit me like a tidal wave. My story wasn't mine alone. It was ours. It belonged to every woman who stayed too long, who silenced herself too often, who gave more than she ever received. I didn't need revenge. I needed to speak. So I kept reading and writing and saying the things we're taught to keep quiet. I wasn't a polished author. I wasn't a public speaker.
But I was a woman with scars and stories.
And somehow in that, I was more powerful than I had ever been in my entire life. That night, I walked home with my shoulders tall, my heart lighter, the world quieter. And for the first time in forever, I felt proud. Not because they clapped, but because I finally clapped for myself. If you're still here, still listening, still feeling every word I've whispered into this story, then maybe, just maybe, this isn't just my story anymore.
Maybe it's yours too.
You see, when my husband sold our house behind my back, it wasn't just bricks and walls that disappeared. It was trust. It was safety. It was the illusion that love meant respect. But what he didn't realize, what no one realized, was that when he took that house, he gave me something far more powerful. He gave me freedom. Freedom to walk away. Freedom to start again. Freedom to remember who I was before I became everyone else's maid, nurse, cook, doormat. And let me tell you this from one grandmother to another, from one woman who has walked through fire.
You don't owe anyone your silence.
You don't have to stay small just because they're afraid of your truth.
You don't need permission to begin again.
They thought they broke me, but I am still here, breathing, laughing, writing, thriving. I reclaimed everything they tried to bury my joy, my peace, my power. If you're a woman who has sacrificed, who has given everything only to be forgotten, used, or ignored,
this is your sign,
your moment, your voice. Say the thing you've been too afraid to say. Take the step you've been too tired to take. Tell your story, even if your hands shake. Especially if your hands shake. And when you do remember this, you are not alone. We're out here, all of us who said yes too many times, until we finally said no. So what would you have done if you were in my place? And more importantly, what will you do now that you know you deserve more? If you too are a mother or grandmother who has quietly sacrificed, please remember, you are worthy of love. You are worthy of being seen. You are worthy of your own story. And it's never too late to start telling it.